You throw us live. Thank you very much. If you want to put the link to the YouTube channel in the chat, particularly messaging it to the folks who are in the waiting room right now, and we will continue to keep an eye out for legislators to get them in the meeting. So,
right, I believe we are live.
It sure appears that way. That's excellent. Hi, all. Thank you so much for coming to join the first Climate Solutions Caucus meeting of 2021. I'm Sarah Copeland-Hansis, for those of you in the outside world who are watching on YouTube, and my co-chair is
Senator Pearson from Chittenden.
So it is great to be here together to sort of launch our work of the 2021 session. We all feel really good about the strong work that we did in 2020, and we are looking forward to continuing to make progress on this critical issue. Feeling a little buoyed and hopeful about some more support and participation at the federal level, but we still recognize that there's a lot that we need to do here in the state of Vermont to ensure a just transition and a clean energy transition for Vermonters. And so thank you all for joining us. Chris and I sent out just a very rough agenda for today. So Chris, any words of welcome that you want to make before we launch into it?
Well, just thank you. It's great to see people here. I know everybody's very busy, and these are challenging times as a legislature and as our communities, but appreciate your dedication to these issues, and look forward to a robust workload in the session that is in front of us.
We will come back at the end of the agenda to talk about our meeting schedule for future weeks, but I just wanted to touch for a moment before we launch into talking about our priority bills, a little bit of level setting about what we hope to do and be here as Climate Solutions Caucus. We recognize that there are climate solutions that we should be considering in every single committee. And so in addition to the sort of priority bills that we're going to be working on, and some of which we'll talk in depth about today, we want to recognize that our role as legislators who are passionate about making progress on climate needs to be active and collaborative within our committees. Our committees are where the policies are being developed. Our chairs are the ones who need to lead those conversations. And so it's really our goal as legislators who are passionate about climate to be helpful and collaborative members of our committees in advancing the goal of climate action in Vermont. So Chris, I'm gonna let you start off talking about a priority bill since you're still here. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yep. Sorry, I'm trying to help with the waiting room.
I'll keep an eye on that while you're talking.
So just logistically, folks have had interns try to join us. We're as you may know, issue caucuses are not supported by staff. So I have been able to push us through to the YouTube channel. We're going to reserve the Zoom call for legislators and our directly invited guests, interns and others, advocates, other folks who would sometimes join us in the State House are invited to watch on YouTube. That'll be archived there. We'll send it out to our emails. Anyway, just logistics. In terms of bills, we're all trying to figure this out, right? In a pandemic, how do you push priorities in a time when the economy is really struggling, when food insecurity is exploding? How do you keep relevant the ongoing climate crisis? And that's not an easy riddle to solve, and we all need to be working on that together. One of the clear priorities that has come through in our early meetings and discussions with leadership and with all of you is economic stimulus. And perhaps the most straightforward way to do that in a way that also is very effective at reducing emissions and saving Vermonters money on their home heat is beefing up weatherization. We have for 12 years anyway, had goals of weatherizing more and more homes. This is, as we know, our second most prominent emissions factor. So Senator Bray, who I don't believe is able to be with us right now, has been working with Neil Lunderville, a name familiar to many people, the director, or I guess the executive CEO of Vermont Gas, on a so-called Weatherization for All proposal. This idea is to create a framework that pulls the ability to do weatherization work out of only looking at state funding. We have historically spent between 10 and $17 million on helping Vermonters get weatherized. And that's worked. It's created a lot of jobs. It's helped save thousands of Vermonters money on the fuel, but it is not to scale to answer the climate crisis. And so the idea is, how can we get it to scale without necessarily putting more pressure on state dollars? That is the riddle that Senator Bray, Neil Lunderville, and others have been trying to unravel. And we do anticipate a bill coming quickly, and are hopeful that that could be a priority. Again, it may be just a framework, but there's been discussions of on-bill financing through your utility as a way of paying it off. There's been discussions about taking federal stimulus dollars, pushing it there. There have been discussions about all sorts of strategies here, maybe even freedom and unity bonds, where communities and individual Vermonters could buy in and help us all tackle this challenge together. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see more details coming. That is something that we're very hopeful. It clearly has an economic stimulus and fits right in with our mission.
Excellent. Next priority that we expect is going to be originating in the Senate. And so welcome to Senator Keisha Ram, and please share with us the work that you are doing on just transitions.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm sorry I can't be here regularly. I'm co-chairing Social Equity Caucus, as a lot of you know, and being new to having two committees, which I used to think was just senators complaining, but it's actually really challenging. I just have to limit my commitments. But many of you who have served with me or known me over the years know that environmental justice is one of my greatest passions. And before I sort of start a very brief slide deck, I just wanted to say, I think what's really important in an overarching sense is that environmental justice is not just environmentalism with Black and brown people saying it. It's a really different set of priorities that is sometimes at odds with the traditional white-led environmental movement. So I just want people to keep that in mind, because, you know, this is at the core about affordable housing, disaster resiliency, having quality indoor air quality, and jobs that also aren't killing you. So, you know, I just want to give you that overlay, and then share my screen, and let me sort of start the little presentation before I share my screen. Okay, I think let's put that in full screen and see what that does. Okay, share screen. Not particularly tech savvy. Okay, there we go. So if anyone can see the year of this bill, this is from 2007. This is the first year in the legislature that we introduced an environmental justice bill to establish an environmental justice policy framework for the state of Vermont, and an advisory committee within the Agency of Natural Resources. You will not see my name on this because I was a senior at the University of Vermont doing my graduate, but undergraduate thesis level research on environmental justice and what it looks like in the state of Vermont. Anyone is welcome to see my 100-page thesis. I interviewed people like then City Councilor Tim Ash and legislator Harry Chen, who have gone on into different roles, but it was a lot about quantifying and identifying the environmental justice concerns in the state at the time. None of these folks are here anymore in the legislature except for Senator Pearson. And sadly, two of these reps have passed away, but this was the first environmental justice bill introduced in the legislature. When Representative Weston and I, who were good friends, she asked me to turn my thesis into a piece of legislation. So one of the ways that we can think about environmental justice concerns is with public health at the center of the equation. As you know, many people have raised that Black and brown folks around the country, and including in Vermont, have existing health burdens from living in places with degraded air quality, having degraded indoor air quality, having jobs that are more likely to make them sick, that demonstrate that whether it's Vermont or around the country, Black Vermonters, for example, and Black Americans have a much higher rate of COVID infection and have had a much higher death rate around the country. That just gives you some more. So this is sort of a way to think about what do we mean when we talk about environmental justice policy, which might be slightly different than what you're talking about with just transitions, which focuses more specifically on climate justice itself. But I wanted to make sure you had a grounding in environmental justice policy. We're now, so folks have context, when we introduced the bill in 2007, we were one of about 10 states that didn't have an environmental justice policy framework on the books overlaying its environmental policy. We're now probably in a smaller handful of about 6 or 7 states. And the federal government, the EPA, as recently as 2015 said to Vermont, you can't keep doing this. You really have to have an environmental justice policy framework that overlays your regulatory framework. And we had pretty good EPA directors. As some folks know, we're hopefully waiting for a new Region 1 EPA director that does not come from Dow Chemical, and we'll be pushing Vermont again to be having this kind of policy on the books. But this, in a sort of legal sense, is a substantive policy, a procedural policy, and a distributive policy. Substantive in that everyone should have access to things like clean air and outdoor recreation and homes that are livable. Procedural in that they should be able to understand what's happening in their environment in their own language. They should be able to participate and not have to go be part of a docket that they can't barely understand in the middle of the day in Montpelier. And that it's distributive. There should be equal distribution of undesirable land use or pollution, so there's not a burden of that in one particular community. So state of Virginia, I believe, and my colleague Jennifer Byrne, because we've been doing this work together in a rural environmental justice project that we've been working on, traveling the state and then doing digital conversations around what environmental justice and just transitions look like for people in the state. Virginia, I believe, is the last state to have implemented an environmental justice policy last year. And their definition of environmental justice tracks to the federal EPA definition, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of every person, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, faith, or disability, regarding the development, implementation, or enforcement of any law, regulation, or policy, environmental. And this particular definition has the distributive piece that everyone has fair treatment, and the procedural justice, the meaningful involvement. A lot of states have put something like the right to clean air, et cetera, in other parts of their law or even their constitution. So you sort of see that right to a healthy environment in other places. We just finished a project that was funded by the Department of Health and the Vermont Community Foundation, where we spoke specifically with digitally underserved communities, because disaster resiliency is one of the biggest ways that you show that environmental injustice shows up in a very urgent sense. And so we talked to people like mobile home park residents, New Americans, migrant farm workers, senior citizens, people in digitally underserved communities like they don't have access to internet, and people with disabilities about what felt most urgent in their environmental experience. And I'm happy to share these slides with you, but what came up is, number one, a comprehensive language access plan. You have to be able to access information in your own language in a disaster. 2, and this may be something that you all have been talking about anyway, the Just Transition Subcommittee is now forming on the Climate Council, and there has been a lot of question and concern around having compensated slots for people who are from these frontline communities and are most affected. 3, you can't just take environmental and pollution information and put it in another language. It doesn't translate well lingually. So, you know, some people may have heard that for a lot of New American communities, the understanding of weatherization is not just about taking that word and putting it in another language. People have to understand what you're talking about and how they would access that program. And that takes deeper interpretive services. Demographic data is important to all of us and all of our committees, but it should really include policing response, health outcomes, unemployment, weatherization, et cetera, so that people, you know, have a safe community to live in, and we're monitoring that in an equal sense. You know, this is something we just heard about, enforcing existing housing rules, including mobile home habitability standards through the pandemic. Some of our only environmental justice grants in Vermont from the EPA have come to mobile home communities because they have sewage backup issues and a lack of clean drinking water more often than other places. As some folks may know, people in mobile home communities make up about 8% of the state, but 40% of those affected in Hurricane Irene. So you see a lot of disparities for mobile home communities. And then obviously the efficiency piece and people heating their homes with space heaters and stoves and having black mold is a big issue for you all anyway. Everybody Eats and the kind of programs that help people access fresh food came up a lot as really important to folks. And things like drop-off coordination and mobile service delivery, because as folks may or may not know, about a quarter of the state reports not being able to get to a doctor's appointment or to the grocery store when they want to because they don't have transportation. This is what would be potentially in the environmental justice bill that I'm drafting with Ellen right now. And I know Susanna doesn't want any more racially oriented advisory groups. This is very common in every single state that has an environmental justice policy to have an advisory group that's ongoing. There is a federal national environmental justice advisory council. It's really part of how you stay in touch with communities, how we define environmental justice, frontline communities, overburden of pollution, just transitions. All of these things need to be defined and currently are not. EJ can be in the mission of your state or your natural resources agency that exists in places like Virginia, Massachusetts, California's Environmental Quality Act, et cetera. Use of a mapping tool to overlay pollution, health impacts, et cetera. And I'll show you an example on the last slide coming up. That helps you identify who is environmentally distressed, because as folks may know, when we have these pilots, sometimes they end up going to places where they just have a big professional staff and a lot of money and say, yeah, we want a new interesting transportation pilot in Montpelier, but they might need it more in Newport or Barrie. So, you know, you have to be paying attention to where are the most environmentally distressed communities. And then one option, which VLS has brought up, is changing our population quality of life outcomes so that we include equality for BIPOC folks, and it could be, you know, other types of folks as well. EJ is about income, race, et cetera, as you saw. As the last slide, this is just an example of how to use the EJ screen tool. I would show you Vermont, but our data isn't great, so it would probably not be that valuable to look at. I believe this is Los Angeles, which has obviously a lot more issues than we do. But you can see the index, and it helps you see that you're looking at things like respiratory health, risk of cancer, proximity to polluting entities, you know, level of ozone, et cetera. And it gets more sophisticated from there. And obviously we need more demographic information and a set of key indicators that we follow in the state and track to use a tool like this. So that is a little bit about, oops, what did I just do? Okay. That's what I wanted to present to you all, because a lot of people have been asking me, how do we do equity? What is environmental justice? What are we doing? And I'm working on a bill on the Senate side with Senators Perchlik and Pearson. I welcome, you know, anyone's collaboration. Carrie Dolan has obviously been a great partner in ANR. I was part of a project with ANR to help them create their environmental justice policy and step back from that now that I'm on Senate GovOps and I can't sort of wear multiple hats. But hopefully that gives you a sense of what we mean when we talk about building equity into the framework and putting it at the center of the work.
Thank you, Keisha. I'm so glad to have had a few minutes with you this morning, and I think as a Climate Solutions Caucus, we want to keep track of your progress on this and help make sure that these conversations are robust and that all Vermonters have access to how we transition away from our reliance on fossil fuels. So thank you so much for that. So that is the two priorities I think that are originating in the Senate. We have two priority pieces that are originating in the House. And so I want to jump to Becca White first, since she's doing a little bit of double duty here, and then let her go back to, to Becca has joined the Climate Solutions Caucus leadership team. We have so many tasks that we want to accomplish, and so there are a lot of us who are helping to divide the work. So welcome to the leadership crew, Becca, and tell us about the Transportation Modernization Act.
Thanks. And yes, I'm monitoring the YouTube as we speak. So if anyone's on the YouTube and is not getting a response, apologies. I actually think Senator Rahm framed it up beautifully in her description of environmental justice, and the priority that we're working on the transportation side. We want to take into account, in particular, how we can support vulnerable Vermonters and reframe the conversation. So I think this is a really tangible way to do that. So very fortunate. Representative Burke is also on the Climate Caucus. Representative McCormick is away, but also on the Climate Caucus. And our priority that we were working on over the summer was the Transportation Modernization Act of 2021. It's officially been launched as a bill, H94. A big thank you to the 70 co-sponsors we received. And we will be talking about bills that are on the wall tomorrow in House Transportation. Really high level stuff. You've already had us present on it, but it includes mileage smart, replace your ride funding, plug-in electric vehicle incentive, looking at electric buses, swapping out from diesel to electric buses, fare-free public transit for the state, focusing on complete streets and really prioritizing those policies. So I won't go on any longer. Maybe that was a buzz of a clock or something. Okay. I'm like, I'm ready with my timer. But yeah, that's really it. Representative Burke has been spearheading the work around mileage smart and replace your ride. So if you have specific questions about that and how it's supporting vulnerable Vermonters, I would put her in your Rolodex. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Becca. And the final priority that comes in bill form is going to be presented by Scott Campbell. So Scott, tell us how your bill is coming along.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. So the bill that I've been working on is a builder registration bill. That sounds like a real small detail compared to the global issues that Keisha and Becca were talking about. But it is actually at the center of improving the quality and competence of our construction industry. We've been trying to figure out, well, those of you who were here a couple of summers ago, summer of 2019, will remember that we had a series of workshops in different topic areas. My topic area was thermal efficiency, since that's where I've been working for most of 20 or 30 years. And we held a bunch of workshops. We heard from over 24 people, stakeholders, about the need for education and training in building science and building energy performance. And so we've been came up with a list of recommendations, one of which was to support a bill that had been drafted and eventually was passed by the Senate that included this registration piece. What it is mandatory registration of residential building contractors together with a voluntary certification. And the idea is that we need a way to, we don't have a list of contractors. We need a way to contact people and advise them that, for example, there is an energy code in Vermont. The energy code is also mandatory, but a lot of builders don't know about it because there's no penalty if you don't follow it. So anyway, advising people about energy codes and training opportunities, and also health issues. For example, during COVID time, what are safe work practices? So this bill is actually also a priority of the Office of Professional Regulation, which would have authority over this registration process. And it has been for a couple of years. They there was what's called a sunrise report to explore the need for a builder registration and what is the appropriate registration or appropriate regulation, I guess I should say, of builders. One option being licensing, which would involve testing for competence. Registration is not licensing. It is just getting people's names and addresses and making sure they're square with their taxes and have insurance and basic things like that that people have to have if they're going to be in business. So the Office of Professional Regulation has an annual bill that they, sort of an annual bill that updates their professional regulation items. And this is the top of their list this year. So I've been working with them, also with a number of other people, including Sarah, to extract the language from the bill that passed the Senate and represent that. So that's the bill that I have. I'm going to turn it in tomorrow. I have only a few, well, maybe 17, 18 co-sponsors. Anybody who's interested in co-sponsoring, I'd love to hear from you. And I'm going to turn it in tomorrow. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Scott. So any members of the Climate Caucus have questions for any of the folks who just presented? And feel free to use your little blue hand, which you can find in when you open up participants. All right, I'm not seeing any hands. So Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, we're presenting these as some priorities. We did not go through the process, as I think everybody knows, that we did a year and a half ago, collectively coming to this conclusion. So Sarah and I are not here saying, this is what you're working on. What we're trying to do is say, here are some what seem like promising opportunities. This is going to have to be improvised as we go because we're in a remarkable time. So I just want to make sure that you hear that from us. And they are a couple of bills that seem rather obvious, so we're bubbling them to the top. But it's not to exclude other ideas that are yet to come forward. And more importantly, to my mind, the federal stimulus and federal relief money coming down from Washington that we're all trying to understand and watching if there's another phase, et cetera, really provides the opportunity, whether it's broadband, whether it's investing in sustainable transportation infrastructure. That's where, by the time we adjourn, my bet is we will have put in real dollars to have an impact on energy consumption and job growth in Vermont. So I think I just want to make sure that this is a caveat that nobody's hearing from us that we're limiting our agenda to this stuff. But these are some things that seem like important to share. And so just wanted to make that point, Sarah.
Yeah, and I think this would be a good time to just spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about the focus of the resiliency work group. And so Carrie Dolan, if you want to share with us just a couple of areas of your focus, and we'll come back in more depth in future weeks.
Thank you. Although the working group hasn't met this year, I do want to just reiterate, in the last biennium, the working group talked about emergency management and vulnerabilities, talked about carbon sequestration from ag soil health. It looked at vulnerabilities of our energy infrastructure and resilience actions taken by GMP, for example, National Guard resiliency and habitat issues with respect to climate. And so there's still, because of the COVID and our Zoom kind of approach, we haven't really organized, partly because I don't know the full extent of people who is interested in working specifically in this area. It may result in just dedicating a portion of this meeting to talk about resilience, because I think all of us care about how to build, while we mitigate our carbon, how do we build greater resilience? But 2 bills I do want to mention with respect to resilience that will be in front of, at least on the House side. One is a Wetlands Bill. It talks about it really targets those large projects that are going to be causing impacts to wetlands. Those projects are large enough that it would trigger a federal Clean Water Act permit. And what this bill does is establish explicitly, provide clarity by explicitly stating that wetlands are part of the water quality standards, and that applicants would need to conduct alternatives analysis. We all know that wetlands are the sponge during flood events and help to absorb some of the erosive forces of high waters. The second bill is another Act 250 bill. As you know, what ended up last year was vetoed by the governor. We will be revisiting Act 250. And forest blocks, to reiterate, a major component of the last biennium bill, and what you'll see this year, is about forest blocks and connected habitat. Forests provide a substantial role in carbon sequestration, and some argue that is perhaps one of our most cost-effective actions we can take to mitigate our carbon footprint. And yet we see that in the tens of thousands of acres a year, we're losing through fragmentation the health of our forests for sequestration purposes. And so we will be in that bill revisiting the health of our forests through a forest block connected habitat component to that, as well as environmental justice. I think now that we're evolving on the Senate side about environmental justice, I think there's an opportunity to revisit that issue pertaining to Act 250. So stay tuned on that bill. That should be coming out momentarily, and it will be looking comprehensively, but a big component of that is a climate component to change the trend. The trend right now is, for the first time in the last few years, we've actually reduced the capacity of our forests to sequester carbon. And so this is a means of addressing that head on.
Chip Troiano has a question.
Not a question pertaining to that. I had an email from a constituent just yesterday about the governor's executive order on Act 250. And I was wondering if the caucus will have any kind of response to that, or if it has been discussed within the caucus, or there was a very strongly worded complaint about this executive order. I just wondering if there's any input from us.
So I guess I would tend to defer to the policy committee who's working on that. I don't think any one or group of us are going to be able to take the depth of testimony that the policy committee can on that executive order. So I guess I would defer to the Senate Natural Resources and Fish, Wildlife, and Natural Resources Committee on the House side.
Okay.
We'll look forward to hearing their thoughts on it. Any other questions for any of the presenters so far? All right. Thank you so much to all of you who shared the work that you are focusing on with the Climate Caucus. Chris talked a little bit about, the potential for federal stimulus and that being a necessary area of focus. And so I would welcome all of you, regardless of what committee you're sitting on, to be thinking of opportunities that you see to help this transition. A couple of other things that I think we ought to try to get behind as a caucus. There will likely be some focus in the House Energy and Technology Committee this year on broadband funding. And I think we all can recognize the challenges that are being uncovered as more and more people need to work and learn from home. And we know that broadband is a critical tool, a critical utility, actually, that all Vermont households really need to have access to. And so I'm hoping, as that committee develops their plan, that we will get behind it with the strength and influence of the Climate Solutions Caucus and say, yes, let's help get broadband out into every corner of the state. Scott Campbell.
Thanks, Sarah. Going back to the federal stimulus money that may be coming our way, a conversation I've been involved in for the last, I don't know, month or two is something called green banks, which is really not exactly a bank, but more like a facility for mobilizing private capital into the energy transition that we're all talking about. I understand that a bill has passed the House, and now with the Senate and change of administration, it's likely that with the Senate having changed hands and the administration changed hands, it's likely that we'll see something coming out of the Senate as well that could capitalize this kind of facility in the states that are ready to receive it. So this is not really my area of expertise, but I've been participating in the conversations and just to try to learn more about it and bring it to people who might know more about how to handle it. I think Andy Perchik was here, and he's also been involved in this conversation, not only now, but this is something that was talked about 5 or 6 years ago. And at that point, the thought was not to try to set up some separate facility or separate entity. And so the idea sort of faded. However, it seems to me that that it might be coming around again, and it might be something we want to talk about. And anybody who knows anything about setting up finance and capital for funding programs, we have a lot of programs and a lot of institutions already. Anybody who knows any more about that would be great to get in touch with you.
Thanks, Scott.
Maybe Andy, you have something more to add?
No, we're just working on it.
Great. Tanya Vihovsky.
Thank you. I had a quick question just in terms of broadband. In a lot of the state, there are basically monopolies and there's only really one company providing broadband access. Is there any investigation into building out that system so that people have options? And that might, just from an equity standpoint, I know a lot of people might be able to get broadband, but can't afford it, given that there's only one option and that's the price.
So who sits on energy and technology and wants to have a side conversation with Tanya about that? Because I think that's probably a really big and deep and long conversation to have, but it's a valid question. So thank you for bringing it up.
If no one else is here, I can talk with her about it.
All right, let's connect you too. Thank you so much for
just
bringing that up.
I'd just say the Senate's about to extend the broadband subsidy program that we've had with a floor amendment today. So we are trying to make it affordable, but I don't have an answer for your monopoly question. It's a tricky one.
All right, Avram, and then we've got a couple more agenda items before we wrap.
A couple of things. First, I wanted to quickly say about broadband is that another benefit from broadband in terms of our caucus's issues, and which the Energy and Technology Committee took testimony on this morning from some utilities, is the ability to use broadband for energy management and energy conservation purposes. And as long as there isn't broadband available high speed to everyone, then people can't take advantage of that. But what I wanted actually to simply let caucus members know, because this is legislation in the short term, is that the administration's proposed Budget Adjustment Act, which will see action in the House maybe as soon as next week, contains a proposal, a request for an additional $1 million to support the standing up of the Climate Council that was in the Global Warming Solutions Act. Our committee took testimony from A&R Secretary Moore on that yesterday. The Appropriations Committee took testimony from her this morning. You can see that testimony on our website, and our committee will be discussing tomorrow and deciding what recommendation we want to make to the Appropriations Committee about that. But they will be wrapping up that bill overall fairly soon, next week probably. So I wanted people to know about that. And just from a personal point of view, I actually thought that this showed a really good faith commitment to getting this thing going in the spirit of the bill itself, which I was pleased with. Thanks.
Thank you, Avram. Actually, Climate Council oversight and monitoring that is going to be part of our ongoing work. And I'm glad you mentioned this appropriation request in budget adjustment. I see Representative Feltus serves on House Appropriations. I'm not sure if there are others. Marty, do you have any sense of how that's being received by your committee? Do we imagine that we'll be able to go forward?
We heard from Secretary Moore this morning in Appropriations. She gave essentially the same information that she gave to Avram's committee, however, less detailed. I think her emphasis to Avram's committee was that indeed the legislation requires a lot of in-depth analysis that for which she feels they need more money in order to really accomplish those purposes. She didn't quite describe it the same way to Appropriations, except that she says the additional money is necessary for technical background. We didn't make a decision. We will certainly wait for the Energy Committee. There's always a bit of concern when we as a body pass legislation and we think it's going to cost a certain amount of money, and then it turns out it's probably going to cost twice as much as money. And so that's an annoyance that I feel on the Appropriations Committee. But nevertheless, it's legislation that was passed, and we need to decide if we're going to do it and do it right or not. Anyway, so that'll be part of that discussion, and we'll wait for the Energy Committee. Yeah.
Thank you. And so folks know, Sarah and I, if you watched at all last year, and I would forgive you if you didn't, did a weekly little back and forth interview trying to summarize issues that were circulating around the State House on climate. We aim to do that again this year, and part of that will be a weekly or every few weeks talking about the Climate Council. So just to say that Sarah and I, and we'll try to bring it forward to this group, are going to be watching and trying to get our hands around their work so that we can keep the legislature up to speed and informed on that. Jim, a quick question, and then Sarah, we just want to quickly talk about how frequently to meet, because everybody is.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be brief. Just leave some thoughts. I appreciate Marty's comment that the administration says they need $1 million to study some things. That could go two ways, as I guess we know. It could go studying some things that are going to help us genuinely move forward in a pragmatic and timely manner, or it could be study some things to figure out why we need to study some more things and we don't get anything done. And I can remember Secretary Julie Moore coming into Ways and Means a couple of years ago talking about these are my sarcastic comments, emphasis added, I guess you could say, talking about why we shouldn't do anything on cleaning up the lake for another year because we had to study some things. And that year resulted in nothing happening, and we got hauled into court by EPA, I guess it was, or whoever it was, rightly so. So anyway, that's my watch this screen kind of comment for all of us to see what really happens with the money. I don't doubt that it's needed, but where it gets spent, by whom and in what manner is going to turn out to be very important. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Jim. All good points. So we should talk a little bit about our meeting schedule. Before we prompt that conversation, I just want to point out to folks who are maybe new to our Climate Caucus organization, we have Senate and House co-chairs, and we have Senate and House vice chairs. And on the House side, because we love to share our duties among several people, we've got a great team of people who are sharing the House side vice chair job, and that would be Kathleen James, who is in charge of mainly external communications. We've got Selena Colburn, who's in charge of internal communications. So she will be sending out meeting notices and all. We've got Mari Cordes, who is going to be in charge of facilitating the distribution of those external communications. And we have Becca White, who's going to be helping maintain our social media presence. What we recognized in our successes in 2020 is that we need to do much more than simply convince ourselves in this room that the climate progress that we're proposing is right. We have to actually take it out to our communities, take it out and let people hear the ideas and participate in the process. And that we get much stronger buy-in when we take our ideas out to Vermonters. And so that's why we have a broad range of folks who are helping to do that. Senator Perchlik, we're going to rely on him to be, as the Senate side vice chair, we're going to rely on him to run the meetings. How do you like that, Andy? You want to run the future meetings? Meeting schedule is what we need to talk about next. We are all, I'm sure, very zoomed out in most situations. And I guess I wanted to put out a proposal and see how people feel about meeting every other Thursday instead of meeting every Thursday. If we can do that, and if we can try to keep the meetings to, 45 or 50 minutes instead of the full hour, it might give you a moment to, walk across the living room, or maybe even take a deep breath outside once in a while. Carrie?
If we do that, I would love to organize a half-hour Zoom on the off week to talk explicitly about the Climate Resilience Working Group. And that way, if people can have this in their calendar, it would be a half hour. So in trying to give people still some time to take a break. But I think at least it keeps that conversation going. I don't want to assume that I'm the only one who is interested or knowledgeable about this topic. I really see this as such an important component of our work, and I really welcome folks' participation. So I throw that out as an idea.
That's a great idea. Thank you. Any other thoughts on meeting every other week with a working group subcommittee meeting on the off weeks?
Maybe that is the good idea, that we think of the off week as homework time. I'm sure we could all use a little extra breathing time, but there's so much work to do. So for now, we'll not seeing any, in fact, only seeing a few thumbs up. Let's do that for every other week. If we get into crunch time and we're feeling like we need quicker feedback loops, we can always change that.
Molly had her hand up.
With all these, people doing publicity and everything, there is a lot of opportunity to communicate what's happening with bills and things like that. So I think it's a good idea. And with Carrie's addition.
Great. All right, so we'll be back here together in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, you know how to find us. If you have questions or ideas or concerns, please reach out to one of the folks on the leadership team. This leadership crew continues to meet on a weekly basis to touch base on progress on our priority issues. So feel free to reach out to any of us.
Thanks, everyone.
And keep it on your calendar, because you'll be hearing about